Hey everybody, this is Liam Douglas with the Aperture Assassin channel, and today I'm going to be going through the menu on a Canon digital camera. Now with Canon cameras, it doesn't matter if it's a DSLR like the T2i, T3i, T8i, or the EOS R, RP, R5, or R6. Canon has been kind enough to keep all of their menus fairly standard all of these years. So we're going to go through them today. I'm actually going to set this up as a playlist. So today we're just going to be going through the red menu, the red tabs, which are the basic setup menu items. All right, so going into the Canon camera menu, the first tab, as you can see, is color-coded red. And these are the basic camera setup items. So the first thing you have is image quality. That is where you can select RAW or JPEG or both. And as you can see, if you turn the top wheel, you can change the RAW modes to disabled, regular, and CRAW. And if you use the D-pad on the back of the EOS R or any other Canon camera that has the D-pad, you can go to JPEG, different JPEG formats, and you'll see at the top of the center part of the screen, above the RAW area, you'll see where the resolution's changing with each setting. How many megapixels the images are going to be. These are the smallest settings, medium, and then of course large, and then JPEG off because I always shoot RAW. So that's how I have mine set. The next, now not every camera is going to have this. This is something new that was added to the 5D Mark IV and the EOS R, and I believe it's also on the R5 and R6, but I don't own either one of those cameras, so I don't know for certain. And that's the dual pixel RAW. You can disable that on the EOS R. It's enabled by default. It doubles the size of your files. So basically the RAW file on this camera is about 60 megs. If you have the dual pixel RAW turned on, it jumps them up to over 100 megs, which is a lot of wasted space. Now, supposedly by enabling it, especially if you're like a portrait photographer, what it does is it takes each image using both sides of the pixel, the left and the right side, and then combines them. And it's supposed to allow you to make subtle tweaks to your images in post-processing, such as, if you shot a portrait and your focus lock was actually on an eyelash instead of the eye, you could shift it down to the eye in post, stuff like that. How well it works, I have no idea. I've heard read mixed reviews about it online, so just leave it disabled, because if you enable it, it's going to burn up a lot of memory card storage, and your files are going to be huge, and in return, they're going to burn up a lot of your disk space. So the next one we have is cropping and aspect ratio. That is where you can change your aspect ratio. You can see there, I leave mine set to full. You can have 1:1.6, 1:1, 4:3, 16:9. I just leave mine on full frame. Image review, you can turn that on for 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 8 seconds, hold, or you can leave it turned off. I leave it turned off. What this means is if image review is on, let's say for 2 seconds, every time you press the shutter and take a photograph, it's going to display the resulting photograph on the rear LCD for that many seconds. If it's set to hold, then it'll keep it up on the screen until you make it go away by half pressing the shutter again. But like I said, I leave that off by default because I do not, what they call chimp, the LCD on my camera when I'm shooting. The release shutter without card, you can enable or disable that. It just basically means whether or not the camera shutter will fire when there's no memory card in the camera. Might be a good idea to set that so it can't fire when there's no memory card in the camera. That way, if you do forget your memory card, as soon as you try to take your first picture, you'll realize you screwed up. In case you don't notice it in the EVF if you have a mirrorless camera. I leave mine turned on, so it's more of a personal preference thing. So the next tab in the basic setup, tab 2, has your lens aberration correction. You can turn that on and off. It has peripheral illumination correction. That one's on. Distortion correction is off. and digital lens optimizer is on. I like to have the optimizer on. That way the Canon camera can optimize any Canon lenses I attach to it. Distortion correction I leave off. I'd rather do the distortion correction if there is any in post-processing. And the peripheral illumination correction, I do leave that one on. Again, it's more of a personal preference thing than anything else. The next one on tab 2 is for external speed light control. These are the settings if you're going to use an external speed light to light a portrait shoot, whether you mount it in the hot shoe or attach it using a remote trigger and have it on a separate light stand. This is where you would configure all the settings for that. So you have flash firing enabled or disabled. I have it enabled because I do use speed lights quite a bit. You can set the ETTL2 metering mode to evaluative or average. I leave mine on evaluative. The slow synchro speed. This is where you can set the speed at which, the maximum speed at which you can get the speed light to fire. So you have various settings here, 1/200 to 30th of a second auto, 1/200 to 1/60th of a second auto, and then 1/200th of a second fixed. And which one you want to use, you'll have to experiment with to see what you like or what you need for your use. The safety FE is enabled by default. This is the safety function for external speed lights. Not really anything you need to mess with. I just leave it enabled. It was enabled by default in the menu, so I just leave it alone. Flash function settings. These cannot be displayed until a compatible flash is powered on and connected to the camera. So once you did that, then you would have some extra options in there as far as controlling your flash function, the power level and all that. You'd be able to control that from within the camera menu instead of having to control that in the menu on the speed light itself or on your wireless trigger. Transmitter trigger. The flash custom function settings, again, cannot be accessed unless you have a flash attached to the camera. They just allow you to do some custom settings with the flash. If you want to get more in depth in those, you can play around with that yourself on your camera if you're going to use speed lights. I'm trying not to make these videos super long. I wanted to be fairly short and concise so people can readily digest them. All right, so tab 3 in the basic setup, you have your exposure compensation. This is where you can modify your exposure darker or lighter, as you see here. You can also set up bracketed shooting from here. I don't play around with mine a whole lot. Once in a while I do bracketed shooting, but not very often. But the bracketed shooting, what it's basically going to do is the left and right bars are, the left side is underexposed, the right side is overexposed, and then the one in the middle is normal exposure, right where your exposure meter is right in the dead center. So if you're doing bracketed shooting, and people like to do this for HDR, you can do an underexposed shot, a normal exposed shot, an overexposed shot, and then merge the three with the automatic HDR blending mode that's built into Adobe Photoshop if you use that. The ISO speed settings. This is where you can modify your ISO speeds. As you can see here, those you can change up and down. You can also do that on the EOS R using the touch screen, the rear LCD on the camera. Same with the EOS RP, the R5, and the R6. The ISO speed range. I set mine to the expanded range, which is a low of ISO 50. And then whatever the maximum is on this camera, it's high too, which is 102,400, or the digital super snowstorm. Why anybody would want to use that, I don't know. Can I set that lower by itself or not? Let's see here. Yeah, okay. So yeah, because generally I'm not going to use anything probably higher than 12,800, and it's pretty rare that I'm going to use that. But anyways, this will set my ISO range. So there you go. Now I have mine set to 50 and maximum of 12,800. The auto exposure, or ISO range, excuse me, you can set the minimum for that and the maximum. I have mine set to 100. By default, most Canon cameras start out at an ISO of 200, but you can change it in here to 100. And then, of course, you can set the maximum as well. I already have mine set where I want them. And then the minimum shutter speed, I leave mine set to auto. You can set it to manual and then choose a minimum shutter speed that you want to use for an exposure. But like I said, I leave mine on auto. Again, it's going to be kind of a personal preference thing. The next item we have is the auto lighting optimizer. If you enable this, whoops, there we go. Let's see. You can set it for different modes, disabled in M or B mode. So you can't use it in those modes, but you have high, standard, and low. This tries to optimize the lighting. I don't like that. I don't like my camera automatically making decisions like that as it pertains to my exposure. So I leave it off by default. Anything that I want to, change as far as that, I do in post-production. Highlight tone priority. You can turn this on if you want. I leave mine off. And let's see here. Okay, so this will improve gradation in bright areas of images, highlights, which is known as the highlights. Enable or enhanced may increase noise in darker areas. Available ISO speed range for stills, ISO 200 to 40,000. Movies, ISO 200 to 25,600. But again, I leave that turned off on mine because I don't want to do anything that could potentially introduce noise into my images. The metering timer, you can adjust the interval for that from 4 seconds all the way up to 30 minutes, as you can see here. I leave mine on the default of 8 seconds. Again, it's a personal preference thing. Exposure simulation enabled. You can set it to during if you want, or disabled. It'll expose, it just determines whether or not it'll simulate the exposure. I think that's in the EVF, I believe. So I do leave that on because when I look through the electronic viewfinder, I want to see what my final image's exposure is going to look like before I even take it. So I do have that on. All right. The fourth tab is where you can set your white balance. I usually leave my camera on auto white balance, but of course you can select daylight, approximately 5,200 Kelvin, shade, which is 7,000 Kelvin, cloudy, which is 6,000, tungsten lights, which I hate because I hate the yellow glow you get from them. The yellow, the warmth, as everybody calls it, I hate. I prefer natural, pure white light, which is approximately 3,200 Kelvin. You have white fluorescent light, which is 4,000 Kelvin. Flash, which is when you're using your speed lights. Custom, or you can set a specific color temperature. Like I said, like to just leave mine on auto white balance, and then if I need to mess with the white balance, I do it in post-production. This is where you would set custom white balance. In order to set custom white balance, you do have to take an image, shoot a single image of something that's pure white, and then use that. You'll import that under the custom white balance. Mine currently says no image there because I don't have any images on my card that I could use for that. But if I did, I could select the image and it would use that as a custom white balance reference. You have your white balance shift and bracketing. This is where you can shift your white balance just a little bit. You can bracket it. I don't mess with that. I don't recommend that you do either. Like I said, just set it to auto. And if you want to make any white balance changes, do it in post-production. Your color space, generally it's a good idea to leave it set to sRGB because it's universal. Adobe RGB is different and can have adverse effects on your images in post, unless you're using Adobe software. Picture style is where you can set basically what you think it is, the picture style for your images. So you can have portrait, and you can see here that each one has different saturation adjustments and so on and so forth. You can use auto, standard, portrait, landscape, fine detail, neutral, faithful, monochrome will actually set your camera to black and white mode. If you're shooting raw, the raw files will still be in full color. When you put them on, when you download them to your computer, they will render on the rear LCD as black and white because you have that mode enabled. If you shoot JPEG, then the images will be black and white and all your color details are gone. You can also set 3 custom defined picture styles if you'd like. I leave mine just set to neutral. I just think that's easier. The 5th tab has your long exposure noise reduction. You can turn that on or off. I leave it off because, again, I don't want my camera messing with my images. I want to make any creative changes in post-production. You have high ISO speed noise reduction. These are limited with RAW or RAW plus JPEG image quality. I prefer to have that disabled. I'm not sure why mine was on because I don't remember ever turning it on. Dust delete data. This just allows you to delete any dust data that could be contained in your software. It'll tag them so that they can be automatically removed in post-production if you had a dirty sensor or dust spots on your lens that showed up in your images. The touch shutter, if you enable that, it just makes the sensor, the shutter more sensitive. I apologize. I leave that off. The multiple exposure, you can set that to on function control or on continuous shooting. It's up to you. Again, this is good. A lot of these things are going to be things you're just going to have to play around with, trial and error, and see what you like for your shooting style. I leave it off. The multi-expose control, additive, average, bright, or dark. Mine, it's set to additive by default in the camera menu. When you get a new camera, I just leave it that way because, like I said, I pretty much don't ever use it. Number of exposures 2, you can increase that as you see here. But again, I don't use it. Save source images, all files, or results only. And continue multiple exposure, 1 shot only, or continuously. Again, not something that I use, so I'm not really concerned with it. The EOS R does have, this HDR mode, but you can set it and adjust the dynamic range so you can automatically capture HDRs in camera. Again, this isn't something that I generally use. You can have the effect of natural, art standard, art vivid, bold, art embossed. It's just different effects it'll add to the images. Continuous HDR, you can have it set to 1 shot only or every shot. Save image or auto image align. That'll automatically align all of the bracketed shots so you don't have to do it in post. Again, I'd rather do it in post because it's going to slow your camera down if you're doing it in camera. And you can also optionally have it saved the source images as well as the HDR or the HDMR image to your memory card only. And the last tab we have in the red section, which is the basic camera settings, your bulb timer, that's going to be disabled because of the shooting mode I'm in. If I wanted to be able to use it, I would actually have to go to bulb mode on my camera. And then if I come back in here, I can enable it, and you can set an exposure time limit for how long the shutter will stay open after you press it and then before it closes again. So that could be handy. If you don't have a trigger release and you want to do a long exposure, you could use that item. You have the anti-flicker shoot. You can enable or disable that. If enabled is set, the shutter release time lag becomes longer. Continuous shooting speed may become slower. Again, not something I would never use. Silent shutter. You can turn this on some cameras. Not all Canon cameras have it. Fast-moving subjects may look distorted. Cannot be used with continuous shooting or flash photography, which I never understood. I could see maybe for continuous shooting, but why can you not use silent shutter just because you're using a speed light? I don't know. To me, it just seems stupid. Silent LV mode. You have mode 1, mode 2, or disabled. Mode 1 is somewhat silent. Mode 2 is quieter, and then disabled means you're not using silent mode at all. I usually have mine on mode 2. And the last item, which is grayed out under the shooting style that I'm currently under. Let's see if I go back to manual. Let's see here. Yeah, it's still the grayed out. This is a high-speed display. Not available because of the associated function settings, which is the drive mode that I'm using. I'm not sure what drive mode you have to be on to be able to use the high-speed display. I'm not going to worry about it. It might be under movie mode or something like that. Because, again, it's not something that I use on a regular basis or at all, for that matter. But these are the 6 tabs for the basic camera setup menu on, and they're, like I said, they're pretty much the same on every Canon DSLR or mirrorless camera. Canon's fantastic in that they've kept their menu system really clean and pretty much identical from camera to camera for many, many years. That's why many people love Canon's menu system and feel that it's the best one on the market. Sony apparently has gotten better with the menu system. They revamped it in the A7S3, but that's currently the only camera that has their better menu system. Why they didn't roll it out in a firmware update to all their other cameras, I have no idea. But that's for another time. Okay, so that's going to wrap up this video of the basic camera settings menu in the Canon cameras. In the next video, we'll get into the purple menu, if that's what you want to call it. It's more like, I don't know, a light lavender or something like that, which is the autofocus menu. That will be in the next video, and when I'm finished with all 6 of these videos, of course, they'll be put into a Canon camera system menu playlist for easy find and playback of all of them. Thank you again for your time. Please be sure to subscribe and like this video and hit the little bell icon so you can be notified of future videos. This is Liam Douglas for Aperture Assassin, and I will see you next time.